Hi everyone, it's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 125, and today I am going to talk about heteroromantic asexual people. That does not include me. I identify as aromantic, and I have never been sexually attracted to a person of any gender. But one thing that you sometimes see when we do discuss kind of the nuances of queer inclusion of asexual people, you sometimes see that otherwise supportive people will say, but not the hetero aces, and sometimes they'll say straight aces or even heterosexual aces, which is a very strange thing to say. But I do want to talk about the importance of asexual inclusion regardless of romantic orientation, while recognizing that heteroromantic aces sometimes have access to perceived privileges that maybe the rest of us don't, especially those of us who are not cis or are in visibly queer same-sex relationships. However, before I start reading the conversation that was had on Tumblr a long time ago, including my edition, I want to emphasize that asexual people, in my opinion, should be considered as a queer identity on basis of their asexuality, not just if it mirrors by romantic orientation what some other members of the LGBTQ plus community go through. Asexuality is by itself an orientation that is not heteronormative, regardless of whether you might be a person in a cross-sex or cross-gender relationship, and regardless of whether that's how your attractions go. It, to me, would be the same as saying bisexual people only belong when and if they're in same-sex partnerships, or trans people only belong if they are visibly trans, etc. It just doesn't make sense to kind of apply gradations to whether a person belongs if the whole point of having a broad queer community that is considered to be under an umbrella is to include everybody who has been harmed by heteronormativity and cisnormativity in their lives. And that does include asexual people who identify as heteroromantic. It's not that there isn't a difference. It's not that there aren't some things that maybe heteroromantic asexual people don't face that maybe the rest of us on the ace spectrum do. But it is very important to understand that heteroromantic people are not heterosexual people. And I am going to go into the conversation now with my reading glasses, which are very cute. So, there was a post a very long time ago on Tumblr that was titled at some point, "You're Just Straight." And one person wrote, "Straight asexuals have nothing to do with the LGBT community. Why is that so hard to understand? Jesus fucking Christ, go away, straight aces. I don't care about Sherlock eating cake." So someone else who was a friend of mine in the asexual community replied, "Straight asexuals. Unless you want to talk about straight people having doctors try to fix their sexual orientation, because that happens to heteroromantic aces too." So that original poster replied, "Please explain to me how heteroromantic aces are not straight. I'll be putting on the kettle. I have time. Go ahead." And so this asexual person replied, "Do straight people have other people trying to change their sexual orientation, or trying to force them to change their own sexual orientation because it's considered abnormal or wrong?" And that person who made the original acephobic post said, "I'm gay. I've been explicitly told that not having any sex at all is the only way I could be gay without being abnormal and wrong. Try again." And the ace person said, "I'm really sorry people said that to you. But I was asking about straight people. Are straight people included in the group that other people try to force to change their sexual orientation? Like, we know this is a thing that sexual minorities face a lot. Is it a thing that happens to straight people? And this person says, it's not just people said that to me. That is actually the official stance of the church I'm supposed to belong to. The same church that has been state sanctioned for over a century to have explicit influence in my education during my childhood and teens. It's properly institutional, really. And hey, I'm not saying people never ever give aces shit and tell them they need to have sex. What I'm saying is aces don't regularly get killed for coming out of the wrong bar, really. And the ace person replies, again, I'm sorry, that sucks. You're not saying people never ever give aces shit and tell them they need to have sex, and I'm not saying that aces do regularly get killed for coming out of the wrong bar. You were the one who brought up oppression, not me. I'm just asking a simple question, because you asked me to explain. It's even a yes or no question, if you want. Are straight people subject to people trying to force them to change their sexual orientation, like sexual minorities are? This is where I came in. I was a little harsher, because this person was so nice. I'm usually kind of nice, but sometimes these kinds of conversations wake something up for me. Here's what I said. Double standard as always. Heteroromantic ace couples get denied adoption because if you're asexual, you're not fit to be married. Source, and I link it. That doesn't happen to straight people because of their orientation. Heteroromantic aces, along with all other aces, are more likely to be discriminated against in housing, jobs, and other access to resources. Source linked. That doesn't happen to straight people because of their orientation. Heteroromantic aces can have their spouses legally annul their marriage if they do not consummate it. There are laws in some states that protect a spouse's right to sex, which more heavily disadvantages aces who are repulsed. That doesn't apply to straight people who are willing to have sex. Heteroromantic aces, like gay folks, are expected to have straight sex. It is not even a protected status within religious contexts like some people think, because once married, people are expected to have sex. Expectations that a hetero relationship will lead to straight sex doesn't seem to be a problem for most straight people in those situations. But even in the midst of all these things that can and do happen to heteroromantic aces in the real world, some people in the LGBTQ community insist that they're interlopers because they just aren't hurt often enough, just aren't hurt badly enough, or just aren't hurt in ways that everybody can see and acknowledge. I guess it'd be easier to see if we actually were being killed coming out of an ace bar, but we don't even have one. But if you're gay, you're not asked at the door of the queer meeting whether you've actually been hurt. Everyone takes it for granted that you could be, and that you're at higher risk for prejudice, oppression, violence, restricted rights, and depression/suicidal tendencies. It doesn't even matter if you actually aren't suffering from any of those things. You're queer enough. You don't have to prove it to deserve support. The standards are and have always been different for asexual people. If we're being hurt, or could be, it doesn't seem to matter. It's not happening often enough because you don't believe us when we say it's happening. Or it's not bad enough when it happens, because really, that's not because we're ace, it's because of sexism or racism or misplaced homophobia. Or it's not visible enough because you won't look at us. Is queerness about whether you could be hurt over it, whether you have been hurt over it, or isn't it also something that has its own life, its own culture, and its own system of support? Any individual can choose not to be inclusive. Any group can choose not to share its resources with whomever it wants, and no organized group of straight aces are demanding, picketing, harassing gay people for inclusion that they deserve. They mostly just, through outsider experience that they're all having, know that they relate to what's going on inside this community. They know because of having been expected to be straight and everything that comes with it. That it's horrible to feel forced into participating in relationships or aspects of relationships they don't feel right about in their hearts. And they know that even though their relationships are assumed straight because of what they and their partner look like, and therefore they usually do experience some modicum of straight privilege, that same set of assumptions makes some gay trans people in relationships look like straight people. It makes some genderqueer people in gay relationships look like straight people. It makes some bi people whose relationships might look straight at the time look like straight people, etc. Those people's place at the table is pretty well established with one of those elusive acronym letters, but in practice, you know the community is shitty to them too, sometimes, what with all the bi erasure, genderqueer denial, and trans exclusion. People thinking you're straight doesn't make you straight. It doesn't make your identity change. And it's all the more painful to search for a foothold and be told the queer community is disgusted by the idea that you'd like their support because after all you're really just straight. Funny, other straight people don't treat them like they are. I'm an aromantic ace and am frequently expected to be straight too. And nobody seems to know which side of the line we're supposed to be standing on either. Being supportive to anyone who's had trouble with their sexual orientation or gender identity, internally or externally or both, sounds like a good thing for support groups to do. Saying who just isn't being heard enough, in your opinion, doesn't really seem like it matches the description on the wrapper, if you know what I mean. So, I do want to say that some conversations I had with gay people at the beginning of my journey of trying to publish my book, which came out about 10 years ago, was instrumental in sort of the way that I framed the ace inclusion issue, where somebody like this person had said, yeah, I was basically told I have to pretend I'm asexual to save my soul, or I have to, I can be accepted as being gay because I can't help who I'm attracted to as long as I don't act on it. And then they would develop resentment for us. And they would say, look, to me, you guys look like the ideal. You look like what everybody is telling me I have to be. So I don't see how you can be complaining that you're oppressed because I'm being told I have to be like you. That is misleading. It is misleading. I do understand where it comes from. It comes from a place of deep pain, that if you haven't been there, you clearly will not really understand it. But being asexual isn't actually what they're being told to do. They're being told to be abstinent, which is not a synonym for asexuality. And so, obviously, we can be the target of people's resentment if they're being told, we look like saints because we're presumably abstinent, which, like I said, is not all of us, but that we look like some kind of ideal to them if they're being shamed for one of their identities and for their desires. So it does make some sense to me that if somebody is coming from that place and they see us incorrectly, but see us from that perspective, that it can be confusing to them why we would feel like we need any support at all, because from where they're standing, they would get more support in their community if they were like us. I don't think that that's actually true, because with the exception of, some traditions that emphasize celibacy, which again is not asexuality, most people inside of religious communities are expected to marry as well. And those that want to go into clergy situations where they're feeling like maybe they're cut out for it more than the average person because they aren't attracted to anyone and they don't have that, quote, temptation. I actually knew somebody who wanted to be a nun, and they were on that track to go into whatever classes that you have to do, or whatever religious pathway, I'm not very familiar with it, where they were gonna follow that path, and they shared that desire of theirs with a nun that they knew, and the nun replied that their asexuality, their lack of interest, meant that they weren't appropriate for becoming a nun, because that's not even a sacrifice for you. It has to be a sacrifice. It has to be a temptation that you gave up. So for you, it's meaningless. So you're not cut out for this. So even in situations like that, you can find opinions within religious contexts that will claim it's not an advantage at all. So, like I mentioned in my response to that thread, I heard some anecdotal accounts of an asexual couple that didn't want to conceive their own children. To elaborate on that, they had gone to an adoption agency because they said that they wanted to adopt because they preferred not to do the deed, essentially. And they interview you in these situations. They interview it as to why you want to have adoption rather than having your own kids, or in addition to having your own kids biologically. And these people, feeling like they were in a safe place, shared that they identified as asexual, and they were denied after they said that, with the reason being, well, if you're asexual, you have no business being married. And there are still consummation laws on the books in some states in my country, I don't know where else, that protect the person who desires sex from being denied sex. You can actually go and get your marriage annulled if your wife won't sleep with you. And in addition, this one's a little more complicated, but sex and marriage are so intertwined in the public understanding, the popular understanding of what marriage is for, that they assume that your marriage isn't valid if you're not sleeping together, and that can be used against people in immigration contexts, where if you don't know this, if somebody gets married to somebody that, say in the United States, there's a legal resident of this country where I live, and somebody whose legal citizenship was a different country married that person, they have to have interviews. And it's not just once. It can be reevaluated, and depending on the country that that the person comes from, it can tend to be more aggressive or less, just depending on the suspicions that people have in a sort of a bigoted sense. They'll suspect it's more likely to be a fraudulent marriage where you're just marrying someone to let them stay in the country, if it happens to be on this list of countries. And they'll quiz the partners separately, and they'll ask them about their sex lives. And if it is determined that the conversations about sex either suggest that they don't have this, they're lying about having sex, or they admit that they don't have sex, this will make their marriage be called into question. And it's just an assumption that they make, that of course if you're legitimately married, you're also having sex. And that can be untrue of many people, not just asexual people. Obviously we're not the only people who don't have sex. It's not even true of all of us that we don't have sex, but you can see how that would disproportionately disprivilege us. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that is very nuanced that sometimes people who are looking at it from the outside are not going to be able to know the nuances of that. And the problem with that is that instead of asking us, like, hey, if you are heteroromantic and you are in a cross-sex partnership and from the outside everybody sees you as straight, then how are you functionally different from a straight person? And there's a whole host of ways that you could answer that, both from issues that you might have inside of the relationship, if you need to get therapy, if you need to deal with a partner who doesn't fully understand your asexuality, or if the person already is fine with that, if it's a mixed relationship or an asexual relationship, you're still dealing with misconceptions, you're still dealing with microaggressions, you're still dealing with people treating you like you are broken, or treating you like you may have a disease. And I will certainly say that those of us who do not pursue partners have different problems than people who are in especially cross-sex partnerships and look so typically heterosexual from people who are not nosing into their business. But that doesn't mean those people aren't asexual, and it doesn't mean that the other things that can affect asexual people don't affect them. It's especially true that growing up asexual can inflict a person with a lot of self-doubt if you didn't have any support growing up, or if you were, if you were subjected to some negative attitudes about it. So, even if you have kind of accepted it where you are today in your life, that doesn't mean that you didn't deal with some pretty rough stuff in your formative years. So there's always the experience of growing up asexual that is not going to just disappear when you find the partner who is understanding, or the partner who is similar to you as far as wanting the same level of sex, if that is an issue. So I would encourage anybody who is confused about what kind of support heteroromantic asexual people might need, or is confused about what sort of contributions heteroromantic asexual people can have to the wider queer community, to talk to those people and do it without assumptions. Do it without, I'm accusing you, you need to defend and go to bat to explain why you're here, or I'm going to suggest you get excommunicated. That's not the way to have real conversations with people. And, I think that we can have very productive conversations if we don't enter them intentionally trying to tell somebody that they don't belong. Find out what it is they want to bring and what they want to receive from these communities, why they even want to be here. Because, stamping up to them and basically being like, you are doing this for attention or because you want to be oppressed, that probably feels a lot like when the hetero cis normative community says that to you. So that's where I will wrap this one up, and I will see everyone next time. Thank you for watching. Bye.